Boom. What's
You,
going on, buddy?
you know, one thing I think of, and I realize I think about this is what shirt did I wear last week? Like on the thing. Not that anybody cares, but if I looked back and saw like 8 of these in a row, is it the same 2 shirts? Now I'm gonna have to go look and see.
Well,
Like
I do that every Sunday.
on Sunday, yes, that's a
Yeah.
very hyperwear. I just am more casual on this. That it's not as high of a thought until this moment, and I'm like, feels like a shirt I may have worn last week.
Okay. Well, I
Or
know
why?
that picture's the same.
The picture is the same for every welcome video, for every, this is like the one spot in my house where I feel like there's a little, whoever this artist is getting
Is
Will
that
Pierce.
is that an artist or is
Yeah.
that a photo?
I took a photo. Yeah, he does. I have a couple of these.
Okay. Well, we should be having a killer song right now, but
We should be.
thematically we kind of struggled.
We couldn't quite find the thing, and no pressure on the group, but we really didn't get the right suggestion either from the crew. So,
Well, I don't think we got any suggestions.
no, the answer is yeah, we got 0.
I mean, the floating one is the rocky one, which, don't, don't,
Yes.
right? Rising up.
Yes. But welcome. Excited to be back. 12:30. You asked for it. We're going to dive in a minute to last Sunday's conversation. But a couple, I guess, announcements ahead of that. I think the major one is Alpha, and we've been promoting Alpha. We're signing up people for Alpha. We're inviting people to invite people to Alpha and even join them, which is a really beautiful picture of community and church. Is not just telling someone to go somewhere, but saying, hey, let's both go to this thing and let's go do this together. And so Alpha signups are live on the website. But you know what? We want to make it easy. Always just email me. If you're interested in Alpha, Alpha Online starts Tuesday night, October 17th. We'll be running Alpha Online. So no matter where you are, you can join in, and I'll be leading that. I'm sure Pastor Mark will make a appearance or 2 as well.
I might try to join you, but if I do, it's from Israel.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
That could be interesting.
From the Holy Land, yes.
I don't know about the time change.
No, I don't quite either. But no, we're excited for that. So yeah, not too late to sign up. In fact, this is the time to sign up. If you have questions about Alpha, if you're interested, we posted a video in the PCC Facebook group so you can get a glimpse of what it is. But reach out if you feel that prompting. Don't delay. And then, of course, we have our Grow Group Wednesday nights at 5:30 Pacific Standard Time. So that's it on my end. What about your end?
Yeah.
Sure.
So we go to Israel the 15th. So I'll be out of pocket for a week or 2 there. But other than that, we'll still try to do all the stuff online because it doesn't matter where you are in the English-speaking world. As long as we're speaking English, I think we're okay.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive in. Let's kind of do a little recap from Sunday's message to get a little refresher. And then let's dive into some questions. If you're watching right now and you have any questions on the message or really anything else, shoot it in the chat and we'll hit as many as we can. So don't delay. If something kind of popped up, we'd love to hear from you live. So, but Mark.
Yeah, and I did say that yesterday when we sent out a little announcement, whatever.
Yeah.
If you got a random topic, shout it out right now. This is the benefit of being live.
Yeah.
If you're watching a recorded version, got to join us next time live, and then you can jump in.
Yeah.
So we're open to that and trying to make time for that as well. Because we realize some of the topics we talk about on Sunday may need some further discussion, but may not. So we want to be productive in our time, and so you can help us do that if you have a question. So we talked about church a little bit. We were studying through John chapter 13, and context, Jesus in the upper room with his disciples. Judas is left. So we got 11 left of the disciples. Possibly could be more there in that room, but not disciple-wise. So, and Jesus is saying goodbye and telling them he's going to be leaving. And part of that is some instruction to them. And I would argue it's the first church. It's the first gathering of committed believers, and the Lord's in the center. And pretty soon you're on your own. I'm out. And of course, people point to Acts chapter 2 as the first church because it was the Holy Spirit descended on people waiting in the upper room, but these people were on their own before that upper room. And so Jesus told them to love each other like he's loved us. And so we learned that, the church should be about one another. It should be about each other. The church isn't an event. It isn't a building. It isn't a thought life. It isn't a philosophy. It's people. Yeah. And that's what makes the ecclesia, or the church, where we get our word church, is the gathering of people. So you can do that in an upper room. You can do that around a campfire. You can do that in a big cathedral. So we learned about that and talked about that. And that might redefine church for people, because we use that term a lot. I grew up going to church. Implication, I went to a place, I listened and, received for 45 minutes to an hour and went home. By definition, that is not church. It needs to include others and relationships that are building and growing and loving. And so much so that when the world sees that, they'll be attracted to Christianity. So Jesus even said that. Then by that, all people will know you're my disciples. And then we talked a little bit about knowing yourself, because Peter jumped in, no, you're not leaving without me. I want to go too. And wherever you're going, I'll go. And even if it means I'll give my life. And Jesus kind of just gently but firmly said, you're not even going to get through the next 24 hours without denying me 3 times. So we saw that Peter could sound like he's super committed. It could sound like he's super devoted. Wow. Nobody else really spoke up. The other gospels said they all kind of agreed with him, but he was jumping out of the boat like Peter does. And yet it was arrogance, overconfidence, and he didn't know himself, because he would not give his life. This first round, he would actually deny Jesus. So talked about knowing yourself. Super important, especially when you're building relationships in the church. Because if you don't know yourselves and your shortcomings and all that, you can do Peter stuff, and it causes more problems and division.
Yeah.
So there's the summary.
There it is. And so the first thing that I really kind of jumped was this idea of redefining what the church is. And you made that comment, and you kind of leaned into it on Sunday as well, of church is not, it's more than an event. And you don't just show up and sit down, and like, that's not what church is. And so I guess my question is, how do you then make it not just an event? Because for the vast majority of us, we go to this building once a week, hopefully, and there is a stage, and there is music and lights and somebody speaking, and we sit there and we receive, and then we go out. So in a lot of ways, it does feel like an event. Is that what the purpose is supposed to be? And if not, how do we break that cycle individually in us? And what needs to shift to make it look more like what the church is supposed to look like on a communal level?
Right. I think this kind of got highlighted in a bit of focus when we hit COVID, because now people can't gather together, weren't gathering together, and you're doing church online. And so that feels like this isn't church, because I'm not in the presence of people. I'm just kind of going to the movies, right? I'm not interacting with anybody when I watch a Netflix series. It's just one way. And so that's an obvious thing. The delusion is that if we're in the same building, then in some way we're doing church. No, we're not doing church unless we're in relationship with one another, doing life together with one another, loving and caring for each other. That's like saying I'm in a room with a bunch of people and we're friends. No, we're not. We're just in a room with a bunch of people. So then all of a sudden, well, we need to get back to what church is, Well, we could be in the room and we tell people on our Sunday service, turn and say hi to your neighbor, because you probably don't even know them.
Yeah.
We try to slow you down with donuts before you leave, to talk to somebody, not to give you food. That's part of it, but the goal is discussion, relationship building, that kind of thing. And that can happen online. We're doing it right now.
Yeah.
We're talking, we're building relationships. Now it's one way because those that are watching, we don't see them, we don't know them unless they identify themselves. But you need to identify yourself, and you need to identify yourself and maybe join a grow group online if you're limited to online, or jump in the alpha group. You need to get into a situation where you can build relationships. So it's just as doable online as it is in person. But it got that highlight that, and I remember thinking, that just because you're sitting in the same room doesn't mean we're in relationship with each other.
Well, I think that's such a huge. Well, I want to stay here for a minute because I think that's such an important point and reality for us, and especially contrasting what happened in COVID and where we are now with in-person, online, and is this simply a box we're checking, or are we truly stepping into what God is calling us towards? And so, the way you described it in my head, the phrase that sticks out to me is that a Sunday morning gathering really should be an overflow of what else is happening during the week. Like, this is an overflow of the realities that I am in relationship with people. So the example of just because 8 people show up to dinner and sit at the same table doesn't mean we're all friends, right? We could be strangers. We might not know each other. We're at the communal table in those weird restaurants where you just sit with a bunch of people you don't know. But it's what you do before you show up to dinner that means, now we're in a relationship. We know each other. We spend time. Dinner is an overflow of this friendship that we have formed. And so how that starts getting deconstructed on Sunday mornings, I love those examples you gave, that church is not the 60 minutes we're in the room necessarily, because a lot of that is receiving, and that's good. We're meant to receive and to lean into worship as a community and put our focus together and center ourselves. But it includes all the stuff before and after, even on a Sunday, and all the stuff during the week. And how we begin orienting all of those things in our life, I think, are significant. And so much of this message was about self-reflection, and we're going to get to some more of that in a moment. But that self-reflection of what are Sundays to me, let's just start there. Is this a place where I really just show up, grab my coffee on the way in, sit down, watch, and go back home? Or is there a part of me that really is seeking to have this become something more? And then you go to the online piece of that now, where is this something I'm simply clicking and watching and viewing in my home, maybe in isolation, maybe with my family? Or am I even online seeking to find opportunities where this is an important piece, but it is a piece of a much larger puzzle of how I'm seeking to invest, engage, and be part of a larger community, AKA the church?
Yep. It's in my opinion, church is the first step, but it's not the end.
Talk more about that.
Susan and I were just flying home on a flight, and the guy sitting next to us. Hi, I'm Mark. My wife says, hi, I'm Susan. Oh, my name's Aaron, or whatever his name was. Can't remember because I'm bad with names. Not that I don't remember him. For the next 2.5 hours, we talked, and my wife's great at this. We talked about his life. We talked about how he was adopted. We talked about fishing. He was showing me diagrams on how to catch certain fish. At the end of the day, the flight went so quick, we exchanged phone numbers to stay in touch. Now, I don't know how many times I've been on a flight and never even breathed next to the person, let alone looked at him, let alone got a name.
Yeah.
Same flight, right? It's a flight. You can go to church and have the same thing. And arguably, the Aaron interaction is the one God was looking for. He didn't tell the disciples, okay, you're going to separate and divide now and go away and work on quiet time and check in with me through prayer, and God will lead you. No, he said, love one another, stay together, support each other, do what I've told you to do what I've shown you to do. So that's the piece. It's got to be intentional. You can be go to online event called church, but you're not doing church biblically until you connect with people. And it can be online too. But you need to take that step. That's why we're constantly pushing you, the viewer, to get in alpha, get into the marriage thing, get into something,
Yes.
connect to other people and let them connect with you, because that Christianity is a team sport. So that's how it plays out. You can come to church and be just as alone as if you stayed at home.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it puts that check back on us. Like, are we showing up? And again, we're just using church as the example. This is a much larger conversation over the course of our week, like what we're doing. But am I outwardly focused? And that was kind of part one of the message was, are we making others a priority? How do I make others a priority? What does that look like? Let's start small. What does that look like simply on a Sunday morning? How I make others a priority? Am I welcoming? Am I seeking to connect? Am I 90% of the weeks, am I blowing in 5 minutes late and blowing out, 2 minutes early? And is that really accomplishing the goal?
You can do it. You just won't be healthy. That's it. That's really, it comes down to that.
Yeah. So I feel like I cut you off. Keep going.
No. And I'm saying that's why, you see what we see. You can see big churches, big gatherings, and leadership blows out because they're not healthy.
Yeah.
They're not knowing, they're not being known, they're not moving forward in relationships, they don't have accountability, they isolate, yet the building's big and glossy and there's a lot of shiny objects everywhere, but we're not doing it the way God wanted us to do to be healthy. So conversely, no shiny objects, and you can have a really solid gathering of people because they care for one another. So it's hard because we live in a very individualized world and a very one-way thing. Here's my social media. I don't really want to hear back, and we can hide in different corners. It's just, and it leads to spiritual unhealth. That's the bummer. But
one of the things that if you're in our line of work, one of the things you think about a lot, I know I think about it a lot, is church sizes. Like, has church sizes been complicit in causing some of this problem? Because you walk into a church. I remember, when I first moved, I've moved a couple times in my life, but when I moved to Northern California, I was living in the East Bay in Walnut Creek, and I'm church shopping. So I remember I walked into one church. You go online, look at the website as best you can. I walked in one church and it was like 30 people, and they were all your age mark and older, and they all like locked in and they all gravitated towards me. And I ran as far, I'm like, this is too small. But it was such a poor instinct in me, because with that kind of people, you can't hide. You are going to be known. You are going to connect. You are going to be invited to things. And I was at a space in my life where I was like, oh, no. I want to go to a church with hundreds of people where I can kind of sit back, observe, and try to figure out. I was in a place where I was still trying to figure out my faith and really understand what it meant to follow Jesus. But yeah, you get to 100 people churches, 200 people churches, 500, 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, 40,000 people. Man, how much harder to do what you are saying and to live in that type of intentionality.
Well, and it's probably a balance, right? Because as you grow, you have to shrink because you can't do relationships with 3,000 people at once. So you got to do 100 groups at 30 or 20 each, and then you can do that. So you got to shrink at the same time. Go to a rock concert and it's a stadium people. There's no relationship building, right? It's all that event stuff. But the flip side is, when you meet somebody for the first time to build relationships, you don't meet them and go, you want to get married? And so if you just hover in like, oh, there's a new potential, then you got to give space too, because relationships take, time. They take time.
Yeah.
But,
so I love that. And a part of how we do that is, again, we make others a priority. We make it outwardly focused. That's our goal as collectively as a community. Our hope is that the community we're part of, the church we're watching, or we're participating in, PCC, that we are aware that we need to be an outward focused community, and not just on Sunday mornings to those in and around us, because that is important. But even just collectively, are we focusing on the other? Are we focusing on what's happening outside of our building, outside the walls?
Yeah.
And one of the things then that helps us do our own inventory individually, because it is about us individually. How I love how you said on Sunday that if we're all not spiritually healthy, then the community we are forming is not going to be spiritually healthy.
Right.
It doesn't just magically happen in spite of you. It happens through you, and it's a living thing. And so how are we making sure we are people that are trying to be outwardly focused? And one of the things you mentioned was this idea of you kind of teased it about spiritual gifting. Are we using our gifts? One of the ways we are called to love others is the overflow of our gifts and what that looks like. And so if you could just do like a minute or two on that idea of spiritual gifting and what that really means in a real context. If I'm sitting right now at lunch watching this, okay, what does that mean? My spiritual gifting. Do I even know what that means? What does that look like?
Yeah. So scripture talks about how we're given gifts. It's covered in Romans, it's covered in Ephesians, it's covered in 1 Corinthians. And there's samples, teaching gift or hospitality or administration or anyway. So, and those are samplings. So it gets a little mystifying and a little confusing when we start thinking about that. So I like to kind of just make it simple. So spiritual gifts different than talents. So that's kind of a weird deal too, right? Because we're all given at birth or as we grow up certain talents. Some people can sing, some people can't. Some people are very athletic, others aren't. Some people are brilliant thinkers and scientists, and other people are artists and they paint. All you can do is take those things and mature those things, but are those spiritual? Because not necessarily, because atheists could do everything we just talked about. So there's something about God gifting when we become Christians. And so there's a spiritual fruit as a result of that. And that's where it gets a little confusing. So I like to tell people kind of like God often uses our talents for spiritual gifting. Kind of like the talent is the PVC pipe and the water going through it is the spiritual gift. So if God's gifted somebody to be a teacher, there's going to be spiritual fruit, but they probably have a talent to speak, right? And so same thing with music. If God's gifted somebody with the gift of worship, then they probably have a talent for music, of which now is being used in drawing people to the Lord. So that's the piece. So start with your talents. Where are you talented? Where would people say you're talented? What do you do every day for work to make income? And then, God, how can I use that within the church and maybe discover some spiritual gifting? So that's kind of the process, but it's not for you. It's not for me. It's not so you'll be fulfilled. It's not so you'll even be happy or because sometimes it's a hassle. Sometimes you don't want to. Sometimes you're gifted spiritually to help me, and I'm gifted to help you for one another, to build up the church. It's part of the loving piece.
Yeah.
And so that's the quick synopsis. Start with you. So a lot of people sit around and go, I don't know where I'm gifted and I'm not doing anything at the church.
Yep.
Okay. Well, what do you go out and do every day? What does your resume say?
Yeah.
You're applying for, and see, that's the irony. So when we work at a church, we want to see a resume to understand how people are talented and what their capacity is to determine where in the church we would place them to bear fruit for the kingdom. Okay. Forget the pay. It's the same process.
Yeah.
And so where are you? Well, I'm an accountant. I'm detailed. Okay. Well, how can that serve the body of Christ? How can you be involved and use your talents potentially for spiritual fruit within the church? Because we've got finances we have to manage. We have to make decisions about. We have to budget about. How can you? That would be an example. And sometimes you got to drill down a little further. Well, I'm a pilot. Does the church have any planes? No. But what does it take to be a pilot? What are your talents to be a pilot? Well, I'm detail oriented. So I've had discussions with firemen who go, unless you got fire extinguishers and fire coats, I don't know what to do. And then I found out they've been a good counselor, because in the fire station, they have an open door policy. People come in and they disciple and help them in fire stuff. So it might take a little massaging, a little figuring out. But you got to step into something. And I often say the body of Christ is used there. You step in as a hand. Maybe it's not the hand. Maybe it ends up being an elbow. Maybe it ends up being, a shoulder or whatever. But you got to attach first.
Well, and one of the things I love all those examples because it does help. Like if you're sitting here right now and you're watching this, it does help begin clarifying. Okay, that's helpful. I think another lane that is often ignored as well is sometimes you just got to say yes to something. You just say yes. If there is a need, say yes. Raise your hand. You don't have to be. I don't know any church that's looking for it. We need the expert in managing kids during. No, you need willing and available, humble hands. They're saying, "I'm willing to show up. I'm willing to be a body." And I know I've shared this story before. I got into ministry because somebody at my church in Stockton, California, stood up and said, "We're desperately need help on Wednesday nights. Can anybody help?" And I'm like, "I'm a college kid. Actually, I'm free on Wednesday nights. I'll show up." And that began a trajectory of God saying, you were available, you said yes, and I'm going to start doing something through that, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not, you don't always get to that place, but there's just an availability. And I think too often we can get stuck on trying to find the right perfect fit and the right thing. But you got to say yes. And that just connects so much with what you said, is because this is not about you. It's for the kingdom. So it may not be the most exciting thing. It may not be the most fun thing. It may not be the upfront thing where I get a lot of attention. And actually, I might be the washing dishes in the back thing because somebody's got to do that as well. And are we available enough? And it's such a good check to continue that idea of am I other focused? Am I outwardly focused? And am I healthy? Am I spiritually healthy here?
Yep. Yeah, and I try to avoid, it's hard because the culture we live in, we like to use the word serve, we like to use the word volunteer. Immediately when we think of those things, we don't think of how we're making a living. We don't think of the talents we're using. Yeah. We think of sweeping, helping, whatever. Yep. And potentially we're a hand and we're attaching at the kneecap.
Yeah.
So I do think the strategic thing, that's why we use terms like partnering, helping, but serving means I'm a pilot, but I'll sweep the patio if you want. In reality, I would rather have the guy that owns the custodial company figure out the patio, because that's his specialty, rather than you serve as a pilot. Where can you now connect to the body that's going to be effective, and it's going to be fulfilling too, right? Yeah. I mean, if you like your job and you like doing what you do, it'll be fulfilling. It won't just be drudgery and all that, and it'll bear fruit. So anyway, good talk on that. Yeah, you can go on and on that.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes. I want to hit this last one, which was kind of this big next part of the conversation, because again, it was so much inwardly focused, which is hard. It's so much easier to be outwardly focused and to judge what other people are doing and to just find our way through that. But when I have to assess myself and check my gauges and my indicator lights and what's flying off and what's low and what each thing is doing, it can be more challenging. And you gave this example of Peter, and Peter having these blind spots, and I thought it was such a great picture of who Peter is, because I mean, obviously Peter is one of the heroes of the New Testament, and his trajectory, of being someone that turned their back and struggled and ran. But then on the flip side, preached a sermon where thousands came to Christ, and just his transformation is pretty incredible. But yet Peter had blind spots, and it didn't just end with the Gospels. It didn't just end in John. Like, his blind spots continued in the book of Acts, and as he was trying to form the early church. And so it's just a big conversation, this idea of, okay, where are my blind spots? Because a part of being healthy is we have to know ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so how do we do that? Blind spots.
I'm gonna flip that around. I'm gonna flip that around because I feel like you do a real good job at knowing yourself. And the reason I say that is because of the years we've talked, had coaching sessions, whatever you want to call it. And so you tell me, how do you do that? Mm-hmm. What, because I think it's an approach. And I can tell you how I think you do it, but but go for it.
No, I'd be curious to know that as well.
See, right there, you would like to know what I think about that, so you would know yourself. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
You're
Well,
curious about that. Yeah.
I feel like, and I've gone through this last year, especially, I went from one place I was at for 17 years to, okay, I'm starting a new chapter, but in that process, I want to really reassess. So I've been deep kind of in a reassessment. And I think I recognize I need different things to help me reassess and understand. And so the majority of it is others focused. I want others that know me well to speak into some of these things and help me identify blind spots, help me understand my giftings, what makes me fired up, what gives me fuel. I like some others that don't know me that well to speak into that. And you were part of that, and going to therapy and finding a counselor, a Christian therapist who really helped ask really good questions. I'm like, oh, I know, that's a great question. I never considered that. Obviously, there's a layer of really seeking God and trying to understand why I trust my heart a lot, in the sense of, it is clear to me the things that give me energy and excitement, and there's clear to me the things that don't, and the things that drain me and make me feel blah and make me feel discouraged. And then trying to identify why do these things what's underneath the things that get me super energized, and what's underneath the things that get me de-energized, and trying to use both those things to clarify, okay, I have a better sense of what drives me and what helps me be healthy. And I would say the last thing is I'm learning more and more my indicator lights, that if on my drive to work I was pretty frustrated and angry the whole drive, and I walk into the office pretty already in a bad mood, that's a red flag, man. Like, what? It is 9 a.m. What just happened to you that you are already like, okay, there's something going on here. That's not the me I want to be. And so, yeah, I mean, I can go on for another 4 hours.
Well, and I think the crux is you're intentional. You want to know yourself. When we say it's important to know yourself, it's important to want to know yourself, or you're never going to know yourself, because you're going to have to explore. I remember you would do things like, I would ask you a question. Well, tell me about that. You would tell me, and then 5 minutes after, you go, okay, I'm done talking. What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
So you're inviting in opinions, you're inviting in perspectives that may not be your own, that may be corrective, they may be encouraging, they may be in alignment, they may be adjusting, but you are inviting that in. And I think that's a big part of knowing yourself. You're inviting in the opinions, the perspectives of others.
Yes.
And giving them the freedom to do that. What I found is a lot of people don't ask questions. What was the stat we were looking at before we came on live? 80% of the people don't know themselves. Only 20% do. Well, if you monitor conversations, there's very little asking and listening. It's all talking and emoting about myself, and not stopping and going, what do you think of that? Is that different for you? How would you, no, you ask a little question and I'm off to the races again. And I talked about that. I talked about, monitoring how much you talk about yourself versus allowing other people in. So that's a big part of knowing yourself. Peter didn't know himself. He said, I'll go to the wall for you, Jesus. And he goes, no, you won't. And had to correct him.
Yeah.
And so how do you handle correction is a good indicator of learning how to know yourself. Can you handle criticism? Or are you defensive, reject, build a case, push away, all that? You'll never know yourself if that's your approach. And you'll never, then you won't be spiritually healthy.
And it's really hard. I mean, it's not fun to hear hard things, and it's not fun to hear blind spots. A blind spot means you were unaware of something that you were doing, and that's not fun to hear, that you've been acting this way in the home, in the office. Do you know that you've been rubbing on people the wrong way, and it's hard. But wouldn't one rather know that instead of going down the road 3 years and be like, I didn't know every time I did that, my wife was so annoyed? Like, no, you'd want to know that. But I think that's such a big part of it. And we'll land it kind of with this, obviously more to go. But do you have those in your life that you're inviting in, and are you truly listening? I've had people invite me in, and it is very clear, like, you actually don't want to hear what I have to say. Like,
Yeah.
and that's fine. Like, I'm not going to force that, but you have to invite, and you have to be open to hearing hard things, and being humble enough to know that we're not there yet. We need to grow. There are areas in our life that we need to continue shaping and growing in.
Yeah, it's risky.
Yeah.
It feels risky in the beginning. And this is all about loving each other, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, it's my way or the highway. And, I surround myself with people just like me. And, so yeah, it's a good topic, but it's back to the relationship of the church and the purpose of the church.
I love it. Well, thank you, everyone. We went a little over, but thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know, even if you are watching this later, shoot us an email. Let us know your thoughts, opinions. We'll address some of those next week as well as we jump back on. But have a great rest of your day, the rest of your lunch.